Hello, everyone. This is Yana Smakula for SimonsSTM.com. Welcome back for another Yippee For Yana episode. In this video, we are creating a fall card with a stunning STM set from Simon Says STM called Pumpkin to Talk About. All supplies I'm using for this project are listed and linked in the video description below. So here's a look at this STM set. It is fantastic. First of all, we have this large, almost 6x6 clear background stamp. It can be used for a portrait or a landscape card, whichever one you prefer. So this is a very large image, and you can use it to create a beautiful background, a partial background, or, just maybe stamp and cut out individual pumpkins if you want. We also have sentiments in this set, and the sentiments are really clever. First of all, the one that I love the most and the one that I'm using for my card today is "Let's give him pumpkin to talk about." Isn't that clever? Just love it. We also have "What's cooking, good looking, happy Halloween, good vibes only, and happy Thanksgiving." So a fabulous STM set to create fall and Thanksgiving cards. I'm going to do a little bit of coloring today, a little bit of heat embossing, and a little bit of card making. So let's go ahead and get started. I have my Misty stamping tool. I'm not using a mini Misty, but rather a large Misty because I am stamping that large background. And instead of stamping this onto white cardstock like I usually do, I decided I wanted to stamp this onto orange cardstock. The reason is when I color and when I know that I will be doing a lot of background coloring, I try to simplify things as much as possible for myself. So I knew that I would be adding a ton of orange to this background to color my pumpkins orange. And I thought to myself, what can I do to make this an easier task? How can I simplify the coloring process? First, I thought about using ink blending and maybe stamping and heat embossing this image onto white cardstock and then ink blending the pumpkins, the entire background using orange ink. But then I decided, why not use colored cardstock instead? So the colored cardstock will provide the background color, the base color for my image. And from there, I can just use my coloring mediums. I am going to use Copic markers to add detail and additional color. I knew I will be using orange, green, and brown colors, and all of these work well with orange. Well, maybe green, not so much, but when you mix green and orange, you do get another, a rather nice fall hue of green, I guess. That's what I'm trying to say. So what I did here is I used an anti-static powder tool. I treated my paper with an anti-static tool. I then used clear embossing ink. I stamped my image onto the background, and then I added antique gold embossing powder, and now I'm using my heat tool. I'm heat setting the powder and melting it in place. I'm using one of these Simon Says STM wooden clothespins. These are fabulous for holding your backgrounds. As you can see, I'm not using my fingers to hold this paper. I'm using that little clothespin, and it works really well because I'm not burning my fingers while I am heat embossing. So our background is nice and ready. We've embossed this, and next I'm going to start coloring. I originally planned to use these colors of Copic markers. I grabbed my Copic chart, I grabbed the hex chart, also my little fish chart. This is my a makeshift chart that I made years ago, and I still use it to help me pick the best color combinations, the best colors for my coloring. So I first planned to use other colors, but as I started to color and as I added color to my pumpkins, I realized that I needed to switch gears a little bit and adjust my colors. So here I'm starting with the E37. This is not an orange color, but a brown color. And this is going to work really well here because it goes on top of the orange cardstock, and it kind of adds nice brown orangey shadows to my pumpkins. Next, I'm using YR09. So this is my basically dark colors. We have a medium, a light, a medium, and a dark, and then that brown was basically a shadow color. So this YR09 is my darkest color. Next, I'm using YR 18. This is my medium color, and I'm extending this further into the body of my pumpkin. The coloring is very simple. I just add the darker color where I think the shadows are and also toward the bottom of the pumpkin. And then I, come in with my lighter colors and I blend those in to the middle of the pumpkin. Now, when you color on colored cardstock, it's a little bit different. It's not like coloring on white cardstock or, paper that is suited for Copic coloring. This is colored cardstock. It's basically not the best paper for coloring with alcohol markers, but it still works. It does the job well, and I like to use it. Another thing I wanted to mention is coloring with Copic markers over heat embossed image. When you do that, you need to be very careful and don't do too much blending, especially next to the heat embossed line, because the embossing powder can actually dissolve from all of that alcohol, and it can get on the nib of your marker, on the tip of your marker, and damage it. So just be careful. When you go with your marker over an embossed line once, it's okay. There's no need to worry, but maybe don't do rigorous blending over heat embossing because yes, that will damage your Copic marker. That being said, I also used Y35, which is my lightest color. Basically, this color is not really visible on the orange paper. You can see it now while I am applying, but you can only see it because I'm basically applying wet ink, I guess. That's what I'm trying to say. So once the ink dries, you won't be able to see it, but it will help blend the other colors that I have going on here. Next, I used a combination of brown and green to color the rest of the image. So I have E37, E33. I did try and use E31, but again, it didn't really make a lot of difference here, so I skipped using it. I also used G99, YG67, and YG17 here, and different parts were colored a different combination of the markers that I just mentioned to create a different look on my card. Now, I'm not going to show you the entire coloring process because I use the exact same colors and the exact same technique to color the rest of the pumpkins on my background. But what I do want to show you is how you can clean up the ink residue from the embossing powder. When you color over embossing powder, heat embossing, with your Copic marker, depending on the color of the marker will color that embossing powder, and you might find that you have some ink sitting on top of the embossing powder, and it doesn't always look good. So what you can do is you can use a clear colorless blender. We have a 0 marker here, Copic colorless blender, and you can use that basically as an eraser and erase that ink from the surface of the embossing powder. Again, be careful. Just go over the embossing powder once with your marker, then scribble it off to the side to get that ink off from the tip of your marker, and then come back and continue cleaning your image. This is very easy to do. Again, this is not going to damage your marker, but make sure you're not doing rigorous blending. You're not spending too much time on one section or one area. So here's a look at my background all colored. I love this image. I love the vibrant colors. It is so absolutely perfect for fall. Now it is time to create a sentiment. Now, to make a sentiment, I wasn't sure what colors of embossing powder I wanted to use. First, I stamped and heat embossed my image in white embossing powder. This was Simon Says Stamp Detail White. It looked okay, but it just didn't work with the antique gold embossing powder that I already had on my background. And that's what prompted me to try and use antique gold embossing powder. So this is a light brown cardstock. This is what I have in my stash. I wanted to use darker brown, but I couldn't find anything that was darker brown. So I used a lighter brown, and I heat embossed the same sentiment in antique gold embossing powder. It looked okay, but the antique gold embossing powder kind of looked lost on this paper. So then I decided I needed to add some ink blending and help define this sentiment. I used Simon's microfiber cloth to clean up any leftover anti-static powder from my image. And then I used Maca ink and a blending brush, and I added dark brown blending from the bottom of my heat embossed sentiment. I then went back to my microfiber cloth and cleaned the leftover ink from the embossing. I used coordinating die and I cut this image out. I also cut another panel from the same brown cardstock and I used barely art glue to glue both together. I like to do this to give my sentiments a little bit more stability. I also cut a rectangle from vellum. I used a coordinating die for this. The coordinating dies for this TM set are actually fantastic because they give you this option of cutting a background for your sentiment and then cutting a thin frame. And I really love the way this looks. So I cut the background from vellum and then I cut the thin frame from mirror cardstock and I adhered that onto the vellum. Next, I'm using foam adhesive squares to adhere my sentiment onto the vellum. And then to adhere the vellum onto the background, because vellum is very tricky to adhere, I'm adding more foam adhesive squares from the back, but I am positioning them where the other foam adhesive squares are. So nothing is going to be visible. You are not going to see foam adhesive from behind the vellum because it is hidden under that sentiment. So with that done, I'm just using the T-square ruler to make sure I position this straight onto my card because I am known for editing my sentiments slightly crooked. So I'm just making sure that everything is nice and straight, and that finishes my project. So here's a look at the card I have for you today, created with a Simon Says stamp pumpkin to talk about stamp set. Thanks so much for joining me today. Love you guys, and I will see you again next time.